Having discussed observations, theories, and data in previous videos, I would now like to use them to explain the concept of understanding. Let me begin by reiterating the definitions given for those terms. An observation is something which has characteristics that have not yet been observed or inputted into a certain theory, and consequently, certain of its useful relationships with other things are not known. Data is a version of the observation which reveals its useful relationships with other observations, once they have also been transmuted into data. A theory is an algorithm which transmutes an observation into data once certain characteristics of the observation are inputted. To give an example, a color sensor is a theory which can transmute a set of observations into color data. This data reveals the previously hidden relationships present between the observations. Now, in previous videos, I implicitly defined a faulty axiom. Understanding is the process of using an observation and a theory to produce data. I had given an example like this. To understand the average speed of a car traveling down the highway, we would use characteristics of the observation, in this case, 100 miles traveled within 2 hours, and a theory, specifically the average speed formula, to solve for the data, 50 miles per hour. I recognized the weakness of this axiom while reading the article, The Limits of Reason by Gregory Chaitin, a brilliant computer scientist. In it, Chaitin argues that understanding, rather than the process of producing data, is the process of producing a theory. For example, if we were given the sizes and prices of thousands of houses, we could create a theory or mathematical formula that compresses this information. This compression of information into a theory is what Chaitin calls understanding. Instead of rejecting my original axiom and adopting Chaitin's, I decided to espouse both as two separate forms of understanding. By doing this, I actually came to realize the existence of another form of understanding. Because the first two forms of understanding are simply different combinations of the same three terms, I decided to recombine them in a new way to produce the third form of understanding, the process of using data and a theory to produce an observation. For example, if an individual's speech becomes slurred, a doctor may conclude that the individual may have tragically experienced a stroke. In this case, the data is the patient's slurred speech. The theory is most stroke patients experience slurred speech, and the observation is the doctor's diagnosis of the patient's stroke. One may validly question whether this situation really exemplifies a third form of understanding, as the definition of data and observation, in this case, may seem interchangeable. Consequently, this medical example would really only exemplify the first form of understanding. But we must realize that the characteristics of an observation and the observation's data are differentiated by the structure of the theory. A theory's inputs are always the characteristics of an observation, while a theory's outputs are always the observation's data. Only if a theory is one-to-one, meaning that every input maps to a unique output, does it become unclear whether the first or third form of understanding is being used. The theory used by the doctor is not one-to-one, because while a stroke can cause slurred speech, injury to the tongue can also produce the same symptoms. After some online research, I realized the origin of the three forms that I've described. They're all methods of reasoning, deductive, inductive, and abductive logic. So I decided to rename our three forms to make them more intuitive for modern-day intellectuals. Just like how the label of a C chord really encapsulates three inversions of the same keys, what we have labeled as understanding really includes three inversions of the same concepts. So the next time you use the word understand, try to think about which method you used. Who knows, maybe your understanding of the subject might increase a little.